Greetings. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is Movie Night. Americans don't have operas. We've never made our own operas because operas are by definition something in a European language like, well, Italian or German, and we have people that enjoy operas here, but they're not really native to North America. But we do have something similar. It's called a musical. And musicals tend to be a little more lowbrow, a little more common. And of course, they're in the English language, so people here will be able to understand what's going on. Now, musicals have been something that have been ongoing for some time on Broadway and other such live productions, but back in the 1960s and into the 70s, it was common practice for Hollywood to bring these musicals to the screen. And some of them were fantastic. The Sound of Music is one, Cabaret is another, but there's one that really stands out, especially given this is the 4th of July weekend. And this is 1776, which was a movie adapted from the Tony Award-winning musical from 1969 on Broadway. Now, this is a bit of a ritual I participate in every year. I watch this once a year, and I have been for many, many, many years. In fact, I first saw this not too long after it came out in the early 70s when I was quite young, and I loved it. Not because the music is fantastic, although I think it is, if you're into this sort of thing, but it showed the people who started the United States as something that was not common back in the day, and that they were human beings. They were men, and they had all sorts of weaknesses, they had all sorts of problems, and they were in a crazy situation and were scared out of their wits some of the time. It showed the people who founded the United States as human beings, which is what they were. Up until that time, a young man like myself, I thought, oh, they were all marble statues or standing stoically in these paintings as if they just snapped their fingers and it all happened. No, it did not happen easily. The United States was a pretty messy birth. And not just the War of Independence, that was a real, real horror, but the politics that had to be dealt with were quite challenging. This is not a historically accurate depiction of what went on in the summer of 1776 in Philadelphia. There's a bit of humor in there, and there's license with certain characters, and some of them are composite characters. It's not meant to be a history lesson. If I sat here and listed all the historical things that were off, well, we'd be here all day and you probably wouldn't want to watch the movie. Generally, it's somewhat accurate as to how things sort of went. This is a production which has gone through many incarnations. When it came out, it was somewhat panned by the critics. They thought it was a little historically inaccurate. The Vietnam War was going on, and patriotism or anything about American history was not exactly, shall we say, politically correct. There were also quite a few good films coming out at that time it had to compete with. And musicals were beginning to fall out of favor. Now, one of the fun things about this movie is all the trivia behind it. When this thing came out, of course, it had to go to theaters to make money, so they cut, including some fascinating scenes and a very interesting musical number that was in the musical on Broadway, but President Richard Nixon hated it and was able to convince some of the people behind the film to take it out. And that is a scene where all the conservative men are dancing a minuet as to all the property they have. It was basically embracing what they thought of was the right wing, but the term right and left wing didn't occur until the French Revolution some years later. That doesn't matter. Richard Nixon hated that song, hated it. And the part of the movie that had that song in it was supposed to have been cut out and destroyed, sent into the fire. Fortunately, some people at the Columbia Pictures studio saved it, and we can enjoy it today. I have the director's cut of this movie, and I was shocked to find out that when I saw it up on YouTube, where you can see it for free, there were scenes there I'd never seen before. So they now have a complete version of this, which is much more entertaining, and it makes more sense. I feel kind of ripped off. When I saw it as a kid, I loved it, but I was missing about probably a third of the film. Now, the movie stars some people you probably have never heard of. One of them, though, I'm sure you've heard the voice. John Adams is played by William Daniels. He also played John Adams in the Broadway production. He is very famous for being the voice of the car known as KITT from the 1980s TV show Knight Rider, if you're a fan of that particular genre. And he did a wonderful job on Broadway and an even better job in the movie, some people said. There's also Howard Da Silva. He plays Benjamin Franklin. He was a pretty left-wing fellow. In fact, he was on the McCarthy list. He was blacklisted for a while. And supposedly when he was making this movie, he would take his time off and go protest the Vietnam War. So there were a lot of interesting characters in this movie, and they all sang their parts. The costumes are wonderful. The singing is great. The songs are haunting. And I won't spoil it for you, but some of them are pretty emotional, and they deal with all of the politics surrounding the birth of the United States. Again, this is a fun bit of entertainment. And it's, accurate enough for the story it has to tell. The movie is 1776. Starring William Daniels, Howard Da Silva, and Ken Howard. It was directed by Peter Hunt, who did quite a few musicals back in the day. It was put out by Columbia Pictures in 1972. Oh, and you might be interested to know that the stage musical of 1776, does come around every so often. Doesn't cost that much to produce. I saw it at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, the place where Lincoln met his demise, and it was absolutely marvelous and an awful lot of fun. Also has some very nice humor in it, which is another thing that movies that can be all too serious, well, everyone needs comic relief every so often. Again, folks, 1776. Starring William Daniels, Howard Da Silva, and Ken Howard. It was released by Columbia Pictures in 1972, and you can see it for free up on YouTube, the complete director's cut. You can also find DVDs and Blu-ray, and you can find it around in other places. It's a good movie to have, and it's a nice ritual to have for the holidays. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends, and share with your enemies, even if they don't like musicals. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. This podcast originates at Substack. My handle there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, don't forget the popcorn, and watch the credits until the very end. Good day,